Happy New Year, Anchor Peeps. ANCHORPETE here, and I'm with the beautiful Shari T. So, Shari, right off the bat, what can you tell our watchers about The Wolf of Snow Hollow?
It's written and directed by a man named Jim Cummings. He's also in the starring leading role. And I had never heard of him. This is apparently his sophomore film, and he's freaking fantastic. I loved it.
Yes. I loved it as well. Jim Cummings, that's funny that you said it's a sophomore film because you know what? His debut film, Thunder Road, it premiered at South by Southwest, which is, near us because we live near Austin, Texas. And
we've gone to numerous South by Southwest. I wish I'd gone to the one where his film premiered. I would have loved to see that.
Yeah, that was in 2018. We didn't really do much for South by Southwest in 2018, but it won a jury prize for Best Narrative Feature. So that's pretty cool, right?
That's very cool.
So we're going to give you a real simple synopsis, the back of the DVD kind of synopsis. And then we're going to tell you about our thoughts about the movie. And then after that, we will go into spoilers, okay? So, Shari, do you want to give the back of the DVD box synopsis?
No.
Shari came up with a theme for our reviews for this month. So for the month of January, the theme for our movies are going to be Snowbound. Yeah, Snowbound. So anyway,
Pete's really embarrassed that I wanted to say it together in unison.
Yeah. So
good job.
Yeah, no, good job with the theme. The idea behind this is that it's basically going to be movies that take place in a setting where there's a lot of snow, because, we're in January now and it's cold out. And, snow might play a part in it, or the cold might play a part in it. And the snow definitely plays a part in this movie, The Wolf of Snow Hollow. So, The Wolf of Snow Hollow, The Wolf of Snow Hollow takes place in a Utah town that has a ski resort. And it's already covered in snow by the time the movie starts. And basically, throughout the movie, what happens is there are a series of killings, and the killings all seem to happen around the time of the full moon.
Mm.
And some people believe that it's a werewolf, and other people, like our guy Jim Cummings, who plays Officer John Marshall, believe that it is a serial killer.
Yeah.
Is it a werewolf? Is it a serial killer? Watch the freaking movie. It's real cheap on Amazon Prime. I think it's only $1.99. Watch it. This movie also stars Robert Forster. And Robert Forster, that's how you say his name. This is his last
Not Foster.
Not Foster. I
Foster.
don't have Corona.
It's Forster.
Robert Forster, this is his last movie before he passed, right? And Jim Cummings, when he went to go make this movie, they sent a letter to Robert Forster asking him if he was interested, and they thought he was going to turn him down. And he was like, nope, I want to do this because of this father-son dynamic.
I think it's a great role, so I'm really glad he took it on. He's very touching and sweet, and of course, he's Robert Forster and does a great job. And I'm so glad that he gave this little independent movie from a near unknown person, writer, director. He gave it a chance because he adds so much to the movie.
Yeah. So he plays the sheriff of the town, and he's kind of
the ailing sheriff of the town.
And he's kind of overwhelmed by this grisly murder case that everyone is talking about, and everyone wants the killer to be found, right?
It's a small town. Everyone seems to know each other.
Before we go into spoilers, I think we should talk about what we liked about the movie.
Okay. I was really surprised by this movie. I watched it back-to-back nights in a row. The first time I had heard it was good, and I just kind of was expecting like a horror werewolf movie. But it really surprised me because there's so much more going on than that. It's really funny. Like really funny and quirky and really kind of like I was just really surprised in all the good ways. And it's not that it's the horror aspect that's surprising. It's just like the characters. It's almost like Twin Peaks or Fargo or something meets a horror movie, Like it's like this quirky small town with a bunch of like little quirky characters, and they say all these like little great side notes, and especially the main character. It's one of my favorite main characters maybe I've ever seen. He's such a mess and such a fuck up, but he has a good heart and he's smart, and he does eventually. We're not giving spoilers.
No,
okay,
we're not.
Okay, not yet. Anyway, it's hard to express how much I liked this movie. A lot of it just like it was surprised, and I think it's original in a way with the main character.
Well, we watched this movie the first time with Sherry's brother, Nathan. And if you're watching, Nathan, hi.
Hi, Nathan.
But I said to Nathan and to Sherry when we were watching it, this movie kind of almost goes into parody a couple of times. Like, it almost seems like a straight up, like, horror comedy. Kind of reminded me of, like, things I saw in, like, Scare Package or, like, other movies that are just, like, over the top, kind of ridiculous. And it always gets up that line and then pulls itself back. Right. And there are these great dramatic moments like with Robert Forster and Jim Cummings, or like Jim Cummings and his daughter, who's played by Chloe East. Like there's some great scenes with them.
What this movie kind of tackles that you don't expect is alcoholism and the stress that people feel in the workplace. I just wasn't expecting to watch the main character deal with all that and kind of fail at dealing with all of that. And his daughter, of course, is, gets fed up with his shit.
Yeah. And Sherry, you mentioned before that, like, there's all these kind of quirky characters. Well, a bulk of the characters are members of the police force, right? And Jim Cummings, in the movie, he's just getting frustrated with his fellow officers. They're all convinced it's a werewolf. He's like, no, it's a serial killer. And he's just, like, ripping into them at some point. He's just, like, making fun of them and how stupid they are. And that's one of the best parts of the movie, is just like him just losing his mind and flipping out on the other cops.
Yeah. Which sounds mean, but you got to see it. You'll totally understand where he's coming from, and you'll really enjoy all the things he says. And with the things they say too, there's like a bunch of little tidbits of conversation.
Yeah, and then while this is going on, while it's very funny, the actual like aspect where you think there might be a werewolf, that part of the film is pretty scary.
I guess I want to say something about a character you haven't mentioned, who is his kind of coworker. She's the female cop on the force.
Oh yeah.
And she's like kind of a superior police officer. She doesn't lose her crap all the time. Like the main character has an anger problem. He gets stressed out. He's worried about his father, and she has, of course, feelings like any human being, and she seems like a good person, but she keeps it professional. And she handles a lot of the things that he can't seem to deal with, and she handles it gracefully. And the second time I watched this, I noticed it a lot more, how many little lines she has that are kind of feminist, where he calls her Julia and she just kind of quietly says, it's officer. And then she just, but not in a rude way, she just gets up and then does her presentation.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought up Officer Julia Robson, right? Because she's played by Riki Lindhome, okay?
What's her name?
Riki Lindhome. And I'm not sure. I don't know. She looks kind of familiar, but I'm not sure if I've ever seen her in anything else. And I think she did a really great job too. And
she kind of reminds me of like Emma Stone or something like that. Mm-hmm. But her character's really good.
Yeah, yeah. She's
the yin to his yang, where he's like losing his cool. She keeps everything cool. But I think she's intelligent. They're both intelligent. They have several moments where the two characters are having conversations with each other, bouncing ideas off each other. She seems to be his equal, whereas the other sheriffs are kind of ridiculous and joking around all the time and making crude comments and thinking it's a werewolf, like seriously thinking it's a werewolf. So, and he's like, I'm a realistic person. There's no way.
Right. So with that being said, would you want to go ahead and jump into spoilers?
Yeah.
Okay. So you've already seen the movie, right? You've rented this on Amazon Prime. So we're not spoiling it for you, okay? The movie, it's not a werewolf, okay? It's actually a really freaking tall guy that dresses up like a werewolf, and we see this at the very end.
It's very Silence of the Lambs. He's the taxidermist in the town, and he has made a wolf costume for himself that he does put on when he commits the murders. And he, of course, he goes after like young, pretty women, and he's kind of got similar. It reminds me of Silence of the Lambs. He has similar motives to the character in Silence of the Lambs. They don't go into it that much because it doesn't seem like they're that interested in talking about him. Right, it's much more about the main character, the officer John, and his father and his relationships. Yeah,
I mean, just with what you just said, it's really a character piece. It's like all about Officer John Marshall. He's competent. That's the whole thing, right? Is that you watch this movie and the werewolf scenes, like this is what I was talking about, and I was kind of vague, is that the scenes with the werewolf, you always kind of see it in silhouette. You don't see its mouth or anything like straight on.
Right.
And It moves like a werewolf, and it's super big. So you think, just watching the movie right away, you're like, oh, this is about a werewolf. and this guy's wrong, and he's going to realize it's a werewolf. And even when we're watching the movie, we even thought that maybe he was the werewolf at one point too.
Yeah.
Right. So,
what you have to do in all werewolf movies, you have to kind of consider which of the characters they're showing is the guilty party.
Yeah. So the whole movie, you know, and I watched the second time with Shari too. The whole movie, you're sitting there thinking like, oh man, he knows what's going on. He's right. Jim Cummings is right, and everyone else is wrong. But when you watch it the first time around, you're like, oh, you know, either he's the werewolf or he's going to realize there's an actual werewolf. And
it's not that kind of movie. It's not like he needs an awakening about, you know, the supernatural world is out there. He needs an awakening about how to live his life and deal with his problems without falling apart.
Yeah.
That's a cheesy way to put it, but you know.
No, yeah. And the way that I took it, you can tell me if you felt this way too, but essentially I thought like the main theme of the movie was trying to like protect others or be in control of others to keep them safe, and like doing it so much to where it ruins your relationship with them.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Right. Robert Forster, he wants to remain as the sheriff. He wants to be in charge of all of his police officers, including his son. And he's staying to the point where it does eventually, Robert Forster just dies of like a heart attack, you know, down the road. Spoiler, right? And
but it's like a strain on the whole office that he continues to remain in charge because he really can't handle work anymore. And there's like some funny lines about how he's like, oh goddamn email, you know, and you know, it's just like little things that should be a breeze for a sheriff in charge of a town. He's stressed about it, and also he's got this heart murmur, and it causes a lot of stress to his son to have to worry about his dad on the job, and they try to cover in front of like the news, in front of the townspeople, that the father has all of these ailments, and really it's kind of not exactly losing his faculties, but he needs to retire. He isn't really capable of doing the job anymore, and they kind of have to cover for him.
Yeah. And
which is like a real interesting situation. I don't think I've really seen that in a movie before.
Yeah. And on the opposite end of that spectrum, then you have Jim Cummings and his daughter, and he's really worried about his daughter. He has her come live with him, and he's like having these conversations with her about keeping herself safe. And it's getting him all worked up to the point where, you know, he's drinking and he's messing up his relationship with her.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all about like kind of like that Chinese finger trap where you're trying to do the right thing. You're pulling, but you're just making yourself trapped further.
Yeah, balancing act is what he needs to work on.
Yeah. And alcoholism plays a big part in it too. You know, he starts off in an AA meeting. It's a really great way to introduce the character. He kind of does his little AA speech. You get an idea for the whole dynamic there. That's the kind of exposition that I can totally handle. If it's like he would give this speech normally.
Yeah, and like a lot of movies, when the character does start to drink, the person who's been sober for years, as he is, when the character finally breaks down, it's a very dramatic thing. In this movie, they don't really mess around with it. He starts to drink pretty fast, and he drinks throughout the whole rest of the movie. He's wasted a lot.
Yeah.
Just like I said, just surprised me. Everything I would expect about this kind of situation, they didn't do it.
Yeah, watching it a second time around too, I realized that he's very competent, and the way that he acts, there's a total shift. And you know, it does get to that point where it's like the over the top drunkenness where he like crashes his car and, you know, breaks things. Yeah, we get to that, but
and it's done kind of in a funny way. Like some of it's funny.
Right. And he becomes more and more like a parody throughout the movie, right? But in the very beginning, he's very efficient. It's like, oh, this is a efficient cop. You know, when you see it at first, you're like, oh, this guy, he's a by the books guy. He's going to get this done, but he's dealing with the supernatural. But in the end, it's no, he's not. He's dealing with a serial killer like he thought.
Just like he thought. Mm-hmm.
But it's things aren't going his way. Mm-hmm. And everyone around him is incompetent. So it's making him drink, you know?
Yeah. It's like he's having a very bad day, but it's been going on for months.
Right, yeah.
And I think we all kind of know that feeling. So it's sort of fun to watch that.
Like, I think that you noticed probably on the second viewing that there's like a lot underneath the surface of this movie, right?
Right. And it reminded me more of Silence of the Lambs the second time I watched it, because Silence of the Lambs has so much, you know, everyone knows it as like a serial killer movie and Hannibal Lecter and stuff, but there's so much about Clarice's character, the Jodie Foster character, how she has to deal with being a woman in a man's world. And the female officer Julia Robson, is it?
Yeah.
reminded me of that character a little bit because she's always having to like fend off. I talked about it a little bit already. She's always having to fend off like these comments. Like she's very polite and professional, and the men are constantly being rude to her and talking down to her. And she's just, by the end of the movie, I was very pleased to see that she made sheriff. She talks about how she had to cut a little hole in the hat because they don't make these for ponytails, as she said. There's just, it's not the showy part of the movie, but it's there all throughout the movie, that character. And I love that she gets to be sheriff at the end, and he does not, because he didn't, even though he does solve the mystery, he made a mess of so many things. I'm happy to see a woman was rewarded.
Yeah.
She also did kind of solve it too.
Yeah, they were this great team. They had this great dynamic, you know, and she's the one that ends up saving him because he pretty much almost dies. You were comparing it to Silence of the Lambs, and there is this scene where it's just like, you know, Agent Starling and Buffalo Bill, where, you know, Jim Cummings, he goes to the house of the guy who's the killer. He's returning evidence to everyone that's connected to the case, and this guy's his last stop, and he puts 2 and 2 together about this guy. And he has the guy stand up, which it's kind of weird because the guy is in the beginning of the movie, and you think that he's
actually in the movie twice, and this is what I was looking for when I looked back at it the second time too. He's apparently the owner of the vacation house where the first victim was killed.
Yeah,
and they prominently show the vacation house, all these stuffed taxidermy animals all around the vacation house, and of course, like I didn't even notice or think about it until I knew that the taxidermist was the murderer, you know? But anyway, he owns the house. He talks about having his wife. He also shows up later in the film, like complaining to the cops about something, and you don't think twice about it. You just think he's another townsperson. So it's not like they focus on him that much, but when you find out it's him, it's one of my favorite moments in the movie. One of my favorite parts is where the main character, Officer John Marshall, asks him to stand up straight because it kind of he says something like he doesn't have a wife when he'd been complaining about his wife earlier.
Right.
And he kind of lets that slip, and it makes a light bulb go off for the main character, and he asks him to stand up straight, and it's a really good moment. Like I just didn't expect it. He was like all hunched over, and I didn't think twice about it, but when he stood up, it's real effective.
Yeah, it's you know, it's scary too, that this last scene, he stabs.
Yeah, it gave me chills a little bit.
That guy that plays the killer,
mm-hmm.
he's in that Thunder Road too.
No, okay.
Yeah. So I think we might have to watch Thunder Road at some point.
I'm totally down.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it for our discussion of Wolf of Snow Hollow. You know, there's a couple other horror movies that I'm going to watch because we're trying to do a best of for the horror films of 2020 on the Lastercast channel. So we might discuss some of them on here. But like we said, the theme for January for the ANCHORPETE channel is Snowbound. So anyway, that's it for today. Happy New Year's, and we will see you guys in 2021.